Hello and welcome back to another edition of the Real Talk podcast here at Duval County Public Schools. My name is Matt Began.
And I'm Vicki Pierre.
And today we're talking about our gifted programs, and who better to talk about the gifted programs with than would be Gail Roberts, the Executive Director for Exceptional Education and Student Services. We also have Linda Zeiler, teacher of the gifted at San Mateo Elementary. And we also have Rebeccah Beller, and she's a parent of a gifted student. So everybody, welcome.
We're so glad that y'all are here today. And so our first question, we're going to go with Gail. We know that, all children are unique. Everybody has gifts and talents, but there's that distinction of a gifted learner or a gifted student. What exactly does that mean? And how many students are in the district's gifted program?
It is so true that all students have strengths, weaknesses, gifts, talents. But in the state of Florida, there's actually eligibility. And to be gifted, the state board rule says that the student has to have superior intellectual development and be capable of high performance. So it's actually part of exceptional education, exceptional student education. And there are specific eligibility requirements for that program. And the first thing is that you have a need for a special program. So you need curriculum that's beyond what's in general education. And then you would need to have a majority of gifted characteristics based on a standardized screener or checklist. And then you would have to have an intellectual development that's in the superior range. And there are, I'm proud to say, over 5,000 students eligible and being served in Duval County's gifted program.
I did not expect such a large number. That's really great. And so, Rebeccah, you have a child who's attending a gifted school. When did you start noticing, maybe my child needs to be in this kind of a program?
I have an interesting situation. I have two children, and they're very different. One, my son tested in when he was in first grade. I did not bring it up. It was actually his teacher who identified him and suggested that he be tested. He is very verbal. He has a very good vocabulary, and it was, I'll say, more obvious to the teacher that he was excelling beyond what she was providing him initially in first grade, and she worked with him very well. So he tested in, and it took about a year from the time for the first initial screening test until the time that he actually started the program. So he started in second grade, and he is currently in sixth grade at James Weldon Johnson, which is a gifted and talented magnet middle school. My daughter is very quiet, very shy, and I felt that she may be gifted in the sense of what the state requires, because I could see that she analyzed things well. She would observe and make very astute observations, but typically only to her family because she wasn't comfortable speaking to other people. So I had approached her second grade teacher about getting her tested, and I won't say got pushback, but certainly some skepticism about that they had not noticed anything that seemed exceptional about her. But of course, if a parent requests it, then you can ask that your child be tested. She did not pass the first screening. She was a point or two shy. So the following year, we had her screened again, and at this point in time, she passed the initial screening and subsequently passed the IQ test that's required. So she started into the gifted program in third grade, and she's currently in fourth grade at Holiday Hill Elementary.
Now, Ms. Zeiler, as a teacher, could you describe what a typical classroom would be in the gifted program, one that is now serving Ms. Beller's children?
When you walk into a gifted classroom, it typically doesn't look like any other classroom you're going to see. The first thing you're going to notice is it's going to be never quiet, seldom quiet, but it's a really happy sound that you're hearing because it's children that are collaborating together, they're working together in cooperative learning groups, they're solving problems, they like open-ended questions that require them to dig deeper. On a typical day, I'll plan for something to last an hour, and it may last an hour and a half because they get so involved in it that they don't want to put it down. You'll see children debating or getting ready for a debate, children that are working on different research topics using computers. They like using convergent thinking and divergent thinking and just coming up with as many ideas as they can and asking what-if type questions.
So it sounds like we got a lot of insight from Mrs. Zeiler, but how does the environment in gifted classrooms generally differ from the typical classroom? And are these students all having a different need, a different set of goals that need to be met?
Yes, all of the students that are in the gifted program have an educational plan that's individualized for them, and they have goals and objectives. And it's typically in the areas of critical thinking, as Ms. Zeiler said, or problem solving or leadership or self-awareness about themselves and their giftedness. And also there is a lot there's professional development that is important and essential for the teachers. And so all teachers that are in the gifted program need to have a gifted endorsement, to have extra courses, to make sure that they are comfortable with all those very deep thinking strategies that were shared earlier.
Now, there's a perception out there, I'm sure you, all three of you have heard it, is that the gifted children are better students. How do you combat that? Because it can be seen both as a positive and maybe even a negative.
Well, I know as a teacher, when I first got to my school, we had a very low gifted population, and I recognized the fact that teachers really didn't know how to look for a gifted child. And I started doing workshops with my faculty every year, and our numbers have risen as teachers began to realize, oh, so they're not the perfect kids. They kept turning in the kids that were the high achievers and always aspired to get straight A's and were people pleasers. And a lot of the times when you're talking about a gifted child, that's what you're not talking about.
And also I think that's why there's a need for the program, is because nationally, in exceptional education, only students with emotional and behavioral disabilities are at a higher risk for dropping out. It's that engagement that they need, and teachers that understand their exceptionality that's essential so that we can keep these students engaged in the learning.
And as a parent, I have talked with many, many parents. A few years ago, I started a sort of a social group where parents of elementary age gifted students particularly could meet and get to know each other and commiserate about our quirky children, because they are so often expected from, there's such expectations given at the school level to be a high achieving student, when in fact so many of them are not, whether it's because they're bored or distracted or their minds are on some crazy problem as opposed to what's going on in the classroom. But I see it very much as a problem to try to make sure they're challenged in a good way. And it's very much a challenge for the teachers to make sure that they stay engaged. So there is definitely a perception that they're better, and indeed that's not often the case. And just as a quick comment, the term gifted, if you go Google about the IQ scale, that is one of the labels on an IQ scale. And yet in common terminology, we use gifted to say anybody who might be good at something talented, and that is appropriate. So there's this problem that when you call a child gifted, that we're assuming that means they're better than someone else, or that other children are not gifted, and indeed we're using it in this very specific way. So as a parent, I find myself being very apologetic when I say, oh, my kid's in the gifted program. And I almost want to say, I don't think he's better than yours. I don't think he's smarter than yours. But his brain works a little differently, and he tested in such a way that shows that. And I often do talk with the children of my friends and tell the kids, it just means your brain works a little bit differently, because I also don't want my children to think that they're better than anyone else.
It's a really good perspective that y'all are sharing. And so, Gail, we heard a little bit about this earlier concerning Ms. Beller's children, but how do students generally get recommended for the gifted program? And is there an age or grade level that's kind of a sweet spot, if you want to call it that, for getting into the program?
Well, anyone, a teacher, a parent, the student themselves can nominate a student to be referred for the gifted program. And we do have students that do refer themselves to the gifted program. The gifted program serves students in kindergarten through 12th grade. So we would encourage schools to start thinking about their students and nominating their students and referring their students in kindergarten.
And Ms. Zeiler, you mentioned earlier about identifying a child that you think would be eligible for the gifted program. What happens after you have identified that student? What's the next step?
Well, once they've gotten the requisite score on the psychological, the next thing that happens is that I'm notified that they got that score, and I develop an education plan called an EP. The education plan at the child staffing one of the things we do is we go through the educational plan with the parent. We talk about, for instance, what is differentiated education, because that's what we provide at the elementary level for most of our gifted children. Differentiation in gifted can mean a couple things. It can be differentiation just because they're leaving their regular classroom one day a week and they're coming to me, and I'm providing for them activities and lessons and opportunities that they wouldn't have in their regular program, but that they're very capable of doing. But I can also make differentiations within the classroom so that if many children are working on something, but I have a child that I see that that child has a certain need or a certain strength that needs to be addressed, I can develop plans just for that child. I also go through the EP to talk about the goals. We have 5 different goal areas. Excuse me. We have 5 different goal areas, which are social processes, critical thinking, research skills, creative expression, and scientific approach. And we address all of those within the gifted program.
So when are the parents brought into this mix?
They enter the mix, well, from the beginning, because it requires their permission to do any of the testing.
And so speaking of testing, I know most people, I think they understand that there is testing involved. So what exactly is being assessed when a student is taking this testing, and is it only the district that parents can work through as far as allowing their children to take that test?
The psychological assessment that's done is to get that IQ score, that intellectual quotient, and it is done individually after the parent has given consent. Parents can have the testing done privately at their own expense, and then they would bring the results in, and we would go through the same process of looking at that information and then determining eligibility.
And so, and just to follow up on that, if the parent decides to get that testing done elsewhere, is it a different test? Is it a similar test? I don't know if there are 5 different tests out there.
There are different kinds of IQ tests. We will encourage the family to talk with our supervisor for school psychology to ensure that they're giving the right a test that we accept as in the district. And we also offer a list of community resources, not as endorsements of any private provider, but just as a courtesy or a resource to families.
And as a parent, how did you find the process overall for you or your child?
It was very straightforward. I had a little more information and insight before that happened with my child. So I have spoken with other parents who have said their only concern was that they weren't initially notified as to when the test would actually occur. I think it's that normal protective parent. We want to know what's going to happen. Did my child get a good night's sleep? Did they eat breakfast? But once it's certainly that the guidance counselor notified me, I just got a note home in the mail. I didn't get a phone call. I get a letter that says that your child may be eligible if you accept or give us permission to test. You sign, you return it. Certainly at that time you could call and ask questions.
And
but
how much did the test cost you?
I did not have it privately done. My understanding is that the range for a private test is around $300 to $400.
But through the
depending
school
on the
district?
Test. It's free through the district.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah. So, and I think some parents choose to get it privately done either because they want to speed the process up. The district only has a certain number of psychologists, so they have to go and test all of these students. So they do it privately to get it more quickly done. But otherwise, my child went in, got the screening done. They provided me in writing with the results and said whether that then qualified them to have the IQ test done. Then that testing was done separately by the psychologist, and then my children were staffed, and I went to a meeting with the school psychologist and the teacher.
And just to clarify, the individual psychological evaluation needs to be completed by the district. We have a timeline of from consent by the parent to completion of the evaluation, 90 school days.
Okay.
And so next question is for Ms. Zeiler. If there's a parent who, you've been working with him or her and their child took the test and maybe they didn't meet that minimum requirement, what do you tell them? I don't know if there's disappointment, there's maybe even anger. What are the next steps that you tend to follow in that situation?
Well, to begin with, if the child is fairly young, I try to be proactive. And I talk to the parent, and for instance, a kindergartner. I don't recommend that a kindergarten student is generally tested in the beginning of kindergarten. And I'll talk to the parent and suggest that they wait till later in the year because this is a new environment for the child. They've never been tested before. They've never taken a test, going with strangers. So that's the first step. But any child, once they've gotten the results, the first thing I let the parent know is that on any given day, any child can do better than they normally would do, and any child can do worse than they normally would do. So don't walk away with the idea that my child is definitely not gifted. Now, I like to have the score because that tells me a little bit about how far off the child is. I also explain to the parent that the child has 2 opportunities in their school career to be tested by Duval County. If they were tested this week and they got the results this week and they didn't make it, the parent would learn that they would have to wait at least a year to request to be considered for testing again. And I've also talked to some parents at times, especially if they're really concerned about the child not doing well the second time, that at any time they also have that opportunity for private testing if they wish.
And Mr. Roberts, there are some who might feel that having this gifted status will give them a better magnet placement when they hit middle school or high school. Is that true?
That's a question we're frequently asked. So there's no guarantee if you're in the gifted program that you're going to automatically get into one of the magnet schools that have the gifted and talented program. There is a separate lottery pool for the students that are eligible for the gifted program, and then those seats are set aside based on class size, of availability, teachers that are endorsed, and then they are go through the same priority status as the non-gifted students.
And I guess to wrap up the conversation, are there any misconceptions that y'all would like to address? I know we talked a little bit about the elite status, so to speak.
There are better students.
Yeah. Or I don't know if there are any other misconceptions about the gifted children or gifted program that y'all would like to address.
Well, I mean, one of the things that, as a parent, and I've noticed with my wife being a teacher also, is some parents might fear putting their child into a program that they think might be too advanced or too rigorous for them. I mean, at a young age, maybe it's second, maybe it's third grade, and the parents might not have the confidence to push their kid far enough. I mean, do you have conversations with parents to try to alleviate those worries and those stresses?
Occasionally, and that doesn't really happen very often. At my school, most parents are, how do I get my child into the gifted program? But I did have one thing that I wanted to share. First of all, that we need to remember that gifted children are first children, and they have a misconception. They very often believe everybody expects them to be perfect. Mm-hmm. And what we need to know is that a lot of gifted children are perfectionists. And they have a fear of failure, that they're not going to live up to everybody's expectations of their giftedness. When the truth really is, no matter how high you ask a gifted child to jump, very often in their head, they're already asking themselves to jump higher so that they can live up to what they believe everybody expects of them.
And Matt, I wanted to talk a little bit about options other than the magnet programs, because kindergarten through 12th grade, there are options for students in the gifted to participate in the gifted program beyond those dedicated gifted and talented magnets. So we want to encourage parents to expand and think about other programs also. And
as a parent, the one other thing I'd like to add, because I completely understand about talking with parents about would you want your child in this program or not. So statistically in the U.S., about 3% of the population supposedly would test is gifted on the IQ. In the school population, across the public school population, it's about 6%. And I have talked with parents who've said, I don't want my child in the gifted program. I want them to be the big fish in the little pond. And I feel like that's such a misconception, because what often happens in the gifted program is it's much less about challenging them more rigorously than the other students, as perhaps providing the sorts of opportunities that gifted kids lend themselves to, like going deeper in knowledge as opposed to broader at times, or that they have certain strengths maybe in mathematics or a language arts and not so much in another, and recognizing. But most specifically, it's letting them know that they can pursue whatever they want, and that in that they get the social. And for me, the most important reason that I wanted my children in the program was to be around other kids who were quirky and wouldn't think my kids were weird, but instead say, you absolutely want to talk about 6th century Chinese history. Let's talk about that. So for me as a parent, I feel like other parents should know that this is about getting your kids around other children who will be their peers.
And I just wanted to make sure that I acknowledge the hard work of our Gifted Program Advisory Committee, which is made up of school teachers and school-based administrators and families and community resources. And they've been really instrumental in helping us really revisit our referral process, and that's led to our increase in the gifted population. And we've done a great increase. And also in identifying students in underrepresented groups, which are students that are in low socioeconomic status, qualifying for free and reduced lunch, or our English language learners. So we've redone our referral system to be more open to their characteristics of giftedness.
So I guess this would be the portion of the show where I guess I'm not sure if we're going to get there, but is there anything else that we missed with the questions we got? Because obviously Vicki and I are not educators. We're considered the creative type of people. So we're not in these classrooms. We hear about them. I have a child that hopefully might get tested. I'd like to think he's gifted. I think every parent probably thinks their child's very gifted. But is there something that we left out that you guys want the parents to know? I mean, this is coming from a teacher, from a parent, and from the executive director of the program. Have we left out anything?
I will add that as a parent, I think the most important thing you can do, particularly with younger children, elementary, is continue to get informed and talk to people, talk to other parents, talk to the administrators. By virtue of being in these social groups, I hear from so many parents who are literally in tears because it has been such a struggle to figure out where their student should go and how to have them fit in. Because at those younger ages, you don't know quite who your child's going to end up being, and they're getting in trouble all the time, and they're getting referrals, or they are getting bad grades simply, or they're bored and they don't want to go to school, and that's just painful to any parent. So the more you continue to educate yourself about your child and educate your child about him or herself, making them as self-aware as you can is going to benefit everybody no matter what, but it'll also help you navigate the school system in that program.
Y'all had a lot of great information. I learned so much.
I did too. Really. It was very enlightening. So, well, thank you everybody for joining us. To get out more information about what we do in the district, you can always go to www.duvalschools.org. You can also go to that front page and find all of our other podcasts down at the bottom. So, on behalf of Vicki Pierre, I'm Matt Began, and thanks for listening.